Long before Greece had philosophers, long before Hermes carried his caduceus across Olympus, there was another source of wisdom, a god the Egyptians called Thoth. He was the keeper of sacred writing, the master of numbers, the guide of souls and minds. His presence was felt in every temple, every scroll, every calculation of the stars. To the Egyptians, Thoth was not simply a god. He was the very principle of knowledge itself, the divine scribe who recorded truth and ensured that balance was preserved in the cosmos. When the Greeks arrived in Egypt, they did not come to teach, they came to learn. They wandered through vast temples filled with hieroglyphs, watched priests measure the heavens, and listened to whispers of wisdom passed only to initiates. In the shadows of these sanctuaries, a secret began to take shape, a fusion of Egyptian and Greek thought, a blending of gods and ideas. That secret would later be called Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. To the Greeks, Hermes was already a messenger, a guide, a clever god of communication. But when they encountered Thoth, they saw in him a mirror, a deeper, older source of wisdom. And so Hermes absorbed Thoth's essence, becoming not just a messenger, but a philosopher, a keeper of hidden truths, a bridge between civilizations. This hidden connection between Thoth and Hermes was not shouted from rooftops. It was whispered in rituals, disguised in philosophy, and preserved in texts that carried fragments of Egyptian wisdom into Greek thought. It was a bridge between two gods, two cultures, one eternal wisdom. And tonight, we begin uncovering that bridge. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching from. Thoth was not simply a figure painted on temple walls or carved into stone. To the Egyptians, he was the very principle of wisdom itself, a god whose presence was felt in every act of writing, every calculation of the stars, and every judgment of the soul. His image, the ibis-headed scribe, sometimes shown as a baboon, was symbolic. But behind the symbol was a deeper truth. Thoth represented the order that kept the universe balanced. He was believed to have invented hieroglyphs, the sacred writing that allowed humanity to capture memory and preserve truth. Every scroll in the temple libraries, every inscription on tomb walls, every ritual text whispered by priests carried his essence. Writing was not a human invention. It was a divine gift, and Thoth was its giver. Beyond writing, Thoth was the master of numbers. He measured the heavens, charted the movements of the moon, and calculated the cycles of time. The Egyptian calendar, aligned with the flooding of the Nile and the rising of Sirius, was said to be his creation. To measure was to bring order, and Thoth was the measurer of all things. He was also the guide of souls. In the Hall of Judgment, Thoth stood beside Osiris, recording the outcome as hearts were weighed against the feather of Mat. He did not decide the fate of souls, but he ensured that truth was preserved. His role was impartial, precise, eternal. Priests saw him as the patron of knowledge, scribes as their divine protector, and philosophers as the embodiment of cosmic law. He was not a god of war or wealth, but of something subtler and more enduring, wisdom. And wisdom, unlike armies or treasures, survives across centuries. To understand Thoth beyond myth is to see him not as a character in stories, but as a principle of civilization. He was the silent architect of order, the divine scribe of eternity, the god who ensured that truth was never lost. Hermes was not a god of thunder, nor of war, nor of the harvest. He was something lighter, quicker, and far more elusive. To the Greeks, Hermes was the messenger, the one who darted between Olympus and the mortal world, with winged sandals and a sly smile. He carried the caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents, symbolizing balance and communication. He was the patron of travelers, merchants, and storytellers, but also of tricksters and thieves. Hermes embodied movement, speech, and cleverness, qualities that made him indispensable to the Greek imagination. Yet Hermes was more than a courier of divine messages. He guided souls into the underworld, ensuring safe passage across boundaries that mortals feared. He was the god of transitions, of thresholds, of the spaces between. His presence was felt in markets, crossroads, and journeys, wherever humans needed guidance or protection. Unlike Zeus, who ruled with thunder, or Ares, who thrived on battle, Hermes ruled with wit, speed, and adaptability. The Greeks admired his cleverness, but they also saw in him a deeper role, the bridge between worlds. He was the one who could move freely between gods and mortals, between life and death, between order and chaos. This ability made him more than a trickster. It made him a guide, a teacher, and eventually, when fused with Thoth, a keeper of wisdom. Hermes' playful nature often disguised his seriousness. He was quick to laugh, quick to deceive, but beneath the humor was a god who carried truths across boundaries. His role as messenger was not only about delivering words, but about transmitting knowledge, ensuring that wisdom traveled safely from one world to another. And so, Hermes became the perfect vessel for Egyptian wisdom. When the Greeks encountered Thoth, they saw in Hermes a mirror, a god already skilled in guiding, speaking, and teaching. By merging Hermes with Thoth, they created Hermes Trismegistus, a figure who carried not only messages but eternal truths. When the Greeks first set foot in Egypt, they were struck not only by the grandeur of temples and the mystery of hieroglyphs, but by the depth of wisdom that seemed to permeate every stone. Egypt was ancient, even to them, a civilization already thousands of years old, with priests who spoke in riddles and gods who embodied eternal truths. Among these gods, Thoth stood out as the scribe of the divine, the keeper of cosmic order, the one who measured the heavens and recorded the laws of Mat. The Greeks, ever curious, looked at their own pantheon and saw a familiar figure in Hermes. Hermes was already the messenger, the guide of souls, the clever god of communication. But when they compared him to Thoth, they realized that Hermes could be more than a playful trickster. He could be a philosopher, a sage, a god of wisdom. And so, in the blending of cultures, Hermes absorbed Thoth's essence. This fusion gave birth to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. The title itself was a declaration. Hermes was not merely great, but great in three realms: master of writing, master of wisdom, and master of the cosmos. In truth, this was Thoth's legacy, carried into Greek imagination. The Greeks had not invented Hermes Trismegistus. They had discovered him in Egypt and clothed him in their own language. From this union came the Hermetic texts, writings that blended Egyptian sacred knowledge with Greek philosophy. They spoke of cosmic order, of divine truth, of the unity between heaven and earth. They carried the phrase, "as above, so below," a reflection of Egyptian balance, disguised in Greek words. These texts would later inspire philosophers, alchemists, and mystics across centuries. becoming the foundation of what we now call Hermetic wisdom. The birth of Hermes Trismegistus was not a sudden event, but a gradual merging of traditions. It was the moment when two gods became one, when Egyptian wisdom found a new voice in Greek philosophy, when the eternal truths of Thoth were preserved under a new name. Hermes Trismegistus was not only a god, he was a bridge, a symbol of how civilizations share, transform, and preserve wisdom across time. In the temples of Egypt, writing was not seen as a human invention, but as a sacred gift. To carve hieroglyphs into stone or ink them onto papyrus was to capture eternity itself. Each symbol carried layers of meaning. Each inscription was more than words, it was divine speech. The Egyptians believed that Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, had given humanity this power. He was the inventor of writing, the scribe of the gods, the one who ensured that truth could be preserved across generations. Writing was more than communication, it was creation. To write was to make something real, to bind thought into form, to give permanence to ideas that would otherwise vanish like breath. Priests used writing to record rituals, astronomers to chart the stars, judges to preserve laws, and scribes to capture the deeds of kings. Every scroll, every inscription, every carved symbol was a fragment of eternity, a piece of divine truth made visible. The Greeks, when they encountered this reverence, were deeply impressed. They already had their alphabet, but Egypt taught them that letters were sacred. Plato reflected on writing's power, warning that it could weaken memory, yet acknowledging its ability to preserve wisdom. Aristotle categorized knowledge, building systems of thought that relied on written words. Libraries grew, scrolls multiplied, and writing became the foundation of philosophy. Behind it all was Thoth, whispering through Hermes, reminding humanity that words were not ordinary marks, but vessels of truth. Hermes, as the Greek messenger, carried this divine power into their imagination. He was already the god of speech, communication, and guidance. By merging with Thoth, Hermes became more than a messenger. He became a philosopher, a keeper of sacred texts, a god who carried wisdom across boundaries. The Hermetic writings, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, reflected this fusion. They spoke of cosmic order, divine unity, and eternal truths, echoing Egyptian reverence for writing as a bridge between mortal thought and divine wisdom. Thus, writing became the silent foundation of civilization. It preserved memory, carried law, transmitted philosophy, and ensured that wisdom was never lost. To the Egyptians, it was divine power. To the Greeks, it became philosophy. And through Hermes Trismegistus, the legacy of Thoth's gift survived, disguised in new words, but carrying the same eternal truth. To the Egyptians, language was not simply a tool for communication. It was a sacred bridge between the mortal and the divine. Every hieroglyph carved into stone carried layers of meaning, each symbol a fusion of sound, image, and cosmic truth. Writing was not invented by humans, they believed, but bestowed by Thoth himself, the god who gave humanity the ability to capture eternity in signs. Hieroglyphs were more than words. They were living symbols, each one infused with divine power. A bird was not just a bird, it was a reflection of spirit. A feather was not just decoration, it was the emblem of Mat, the principle of truth and balance. To write was to invoke the gods, to call upon forces greater than oneself, to weave the unseen into the visible. The Greeks, when they encountered this sacred language, were astonished. Their alphabet was practical, efficient, and suited for philosophy. But Egypt's hieroglyphs seemed to carry mystery beyond mere letters. They saw in Egyptian writing a depth that suggested hidden truths, a language that spoke not only to the mind but to the soul. This encounter shaped their own reverence for words. Plato mused on the nature of language, Aristotle categorized speech, and later philosophers treated words as vessels of wisdom. Hermes, the Greek god of communication, became the natural inheritor of this divine gift. Already the messenger of Olympus, Hermes was the patron of speech, persuasion, and cleverness. When fused with Thoth, he became Hermes Trismegistus, not only a messenger, but a master of sacred language. The Hermetic texts attributed to him carried echoes of Egyptian hieroglyphic wisdom disguised in Greek words. They spoke of cosmic unity, divine truth, and the eternal connection between heaven and earth. Thus, the language of the gods survived across cultures. In Egypt, it was hieroglyphs carved into temple walls. In Greece, it became philosophy, written in dialogues and treatises. In both, it was sacred, eternal, and powerful. Words were not ordinary marks. They were bridges between worlds, channels of wisdom, echoes of divine speech. And so, the language of the gods reminds us that every word carries weight. Every symbol holds meaning, and every act of writing is an invocation of truth. Wisdom in the ancient world was never confined to one land. It traveled quietly, carried by merchants, priests, and philosophers who crossed seas and deserts in search of truth. Egypt, with its towering temples and libraries of papyrus scrolls, became a magnet for seekers of knowledge. The Greeks, curious and ambitious, journeyed there not to teach, but to learn. They found in Egypt a civilization already thousands of years old, steeped in rituals, astronomy, mathematics, and moral law. The Egyptians guarded their wisdom carefully. Temples were schools, but not for everyone. Only initiates, purified and disciplined, could enter the deeper chambers where sacred teachings were revealed. Knowledge was passed in symbols, in rituals, in silence. It was never shouted in marketplaces. It was whispered in shadows. Yet fragments of this wisdom slipped across borders, carried by travelers who returned home with stories of strange gods and profound truths. When Greek thinkers encountered Thoth, they recognized in him a figure who mirrored their own Hermes. Both were guides, both were messengers, both carried knowledge across boundaries. The Greeks absorbed Egyptian teachings, reshaping them into philosophy. Geometry became logic, cosmic order became ethics, sacred writing became dialogues. What had been Egyptian ritual became Greek thought, transformed but preserved. This passing of knowledge was not theft but transmission. Civilizations have always borrowed, adapted, and reshaped ideas. Egypt gave Greece the foundation of philosophy, and Greece carried it forward, embedding it in texts that would survive for centuries. The wisdom of Thoth, disguised as Hermes Trismegistus, became part of the Western tradition, influencing scholars, mystics, and scientists long after the temples of Egypt had fallen silent. Sacred knowledge passed across cultures like a river flowing into new lands. It changed shape, it took new names, but its essence remained. The bridge between Thoth and Hermes was not only a union of gods, but a symbol of how wisdom survives, hidden, transformed, yet eternal. By the time Greek thinkers began shaping philosophy, Egypt was already ancient. Its temples had stood for millennia. Its priests had measured the stars long before Greek astronomers lifted their eyes to the heavens, and its rituals carried the weight of traditions older than the myths of Olympus. To the Greeks, Egypt was not simply another land. It was a living library of wisdom, a civilization so old that it seemed to touch eternity. The Greeks admired Egypt's stability, while their own city-states rose and fell with wars and politics. Egypt endured, anchored by the Nile and guided by cosmic order. Its priests spoke of mat truth, balance, justice, principles that governed not only the gods but the daily lives of mortals. This sense of eternal balance fascinated Greek visitors, who saw in Egypt a model of wisdom that transcended time. Egypt's temples were schools, its rituals lessons, its hieroglyphs mysteries waiting to be deciphered. Greek travelers, including figures like Pythagoras and Plato, sought initiation into these secrets. They did not come to teach, they came to learn. They absorbed fragments of astronomy, mathematics, and moral law, carrying them back to Greece, where they reshaped them into philosophy. Why did Greece look to Egypt? Because Egypt offered something Greece lacked: age, depth, and continuity. The Greeks were brilliant innovators, but they recognized that true wisdom often comes from those who have walked the path longest. Egypt was that elder civilization, the keeper of truths that had survived floods, dynasties, and centuries. And so, Greece looked to Egypt not out of conquest, but out of reverence. In the shadow of temples, Greek philosophers found inspiration. In the figure of Thoth, they saw their own Hermes reflected, and in the merging of these traditions, they created Hermes Trismegistus, a symbol of how wisdom flows across cultures, reshaped but never lost. In Egypt, temples were not only places of worship, but centers of learning. Their towering walls, covered in hieroglyphs, were more than decoration. They were textbooks carved in stone. Every column, every chamber, every ritual carried lessons for those who could understand. To the ordinary visitor, temples seemed mysterious, filled with incense and chants. But to initiates, they were schools of wisdom, carefully designed to teach truths about the cosmos, morality, and the soul. Priests acted as teachers, guiding students through layers of knowledge. The outer courtyards were for the public, filled with rituals that reinforced the principles of mat, truth, balance, and justice. Deeper inside, only initiates could enter, where geometry, astronomy, and sacred texts were studied. The innermost chambers were reserved for the highest mysteries, where silence itself was a form of teaching. Thoth was the patron of these schools. His presence was invoked in every lesson. His wisdom reflected in every calculation of stars, every recitation of law, every inscription on papyrus. To study in a temple was to walk in the shadow of Thoth, to learn not only facts, but the eternal principles that governed the universe. The Greeks, when they visited Egypt, were astonished by this system. Their own academies were still young, places of debate and dialogue. In Egypt, they found a tradition thousands of years old, where knowledge was preserved through ritual and symbol. They carried fragments of this model back to Greece, shaping their own schools of philosophy. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum echoed the Egyptian temple system, though stripped of its rituals and clothed in logic. Thus, temples were more than religious monuments. They were libraries, classrooms, and laboratories of the ancient world. They preserved wisdom in stone and silence, ensuring that knowledge was passed across generations. and in their shadows, the connection between Thoth and Hermes began to take shape. As Greek thinkers absorbed Egyptian lessons and transformed them into philosophy. In the ancient world, numbers were not simply tools for counting sheep or measuring grain. To the Egyptians, they were sacred reflections of the universe's hidden harmony. Geometry was not just mathematics. It was a divine language, a way to understand the order of the cosmos. Temples were aligned with the stars, pyramids built with proportions that echoed eternity, and calendars designed to follow the rhythm of the Nile and the heavens. At the heart of this system stood Thoth, the god who measured, calculated, and ensured that balance was preserved. Every angle of a pyramid, every alignment of a temple, every cycle of the moon was seen as part of a greater design. Numbers were not arbitrary. They carried meaning. 3 symbolized balance, 4 stability, 7 mystery, and 12 completeness. Geometry was the art of revealing these truths, of showing how the divine order manifested in the physical world. To study numbers was to study the mind of the gods. The Greeks, when they encountered this vision, were captivated. Pythagoras, who traveled to Egypt, absorbed the idea that numbers were divine. He returned to Greece, speaking of harmony, of ratios, of the music of the spheres. His famous theorem was more than a mathematical formula. It was a reflection of Egyptian sacred geometry dressed in Greek logic. Plato later spoke of eternal forms, Aristotle of universal laws, all echoes of the Egyptian belief that numbers revealed cosmic truth. Hermes, as the Greek messenger, became the carrier of this wisdom. By merging with Thoth, he inherited the role of cosmic measurer, the one who guided humanity not only with words, but with the principles of order. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, was said to master writing wisdom and the cosmos. Thus, numbers and geometry became bridges between civilizations. Egypt gave them sacred meaning. Greece gave them philosophical form. And together, they shaped the foundations of science, art, and architecture. Even today, when we admire symmetry, calculate proportions, or marvel at the elegance of mathematics, we are hearing the quiet echo of Thoth and Hermes, whispering that the universe is not chaos but order, not accident but design. The wisdom of Thoth was not confined to numbers and writing. It extended into the realm of law and morality. Egyptians believed that the universe was governed by Mat, the principle of truth, balance, and justice. Every action, every decision, every judgment was measured against this cosmic order. Thoth, as the divine scribe, recorded these laws faithfully. He did not invent morality, but he ensured that it was preserved, that the scales of justice remained balanced, and that truth was never lost in the chaos of human life. In the Hall of Judgment, Thoth stood beside Osiris, carefully noting the fate of souls as their hearts were weighed against the feather of Mat. His role was impartial, precise, eternal. He was not swayed by emotion or power. He was the recorder of truth, the guardian of balance. To the Egyptians, this was the essence of divine law, impartial, eternal, and rooted in cosmic harmony. The Greeks, when they encountered this vision, reshaped it into philosophy. Plato spoke of justice as harmony within the soul, Aristotle of virtue as moderation, and the Stoics of living in accordance with nature. These teachings were echoes of Egyptian morality, transformed into Greek language. Hermes, as the messenger god, became the carrier of these truths. By merging with Thoth, he inherited the role of moral guide, the one who taught humanity not only how to speak, but how to live. Hermes Trismegistus, in the Hermetic texts, spoke of the unity of all things, the importance of balance, and the pursuit of truth. These teachings were not inventions of Greece, but reflections of Egypt's eternal laws. The feather of Mat became the philosopher's pursuit of virtue. The scales of judgment became the philosopher's search for justice, and Thoth's impartial recording became Hermes' guidance of souls and minds. Thus, Thoth's laws and Hermes' teachings were two sides of the same coin. One was carved in stone, the other written in dialogues. One was preserved in temples, the other in academies. Together they carried the same eternal wisdom, that truth is balance, that justice is harmony, and that morality is not human invention, but divine order. Hermes was never the strongest, nor the most feared, nor the most worshipped of the Greek gods. Yet he was indispensable, because he carried messages between worlds. His winged sandals allowed him to move swiftly across boundaries, from Olympus to earth, from the living to the dead. He was the god of transitions, of movement, of communication. Without Hermes, the words of Zeus would never reach mortals, and the prayers of mortals would never reach the gods. This role as messenger was not trivial. It made Hermes the bridge between realms, the one who ensured that divine will was known and mortal voices were heard. He was the god of speech, persuasion, and cleverness, qualities that gave him power not through force but through words. In markets, crossroads, and journeys, Hermes was present, guiding travelers, protecting merchants, and inspiring storytellers. When the Greeks encountered Egypt, they saw in Thoth a figure who mirrored Hermes. Thoth was also a messenger, though in a different way. He recorded the words of the gods, preserved truth in writing, and guided souls in judgment. He did not carry messages with speed, but with permanence. Where Hermes was swift, Thoth was eternal. Where Hermes spoke, Thoth wrote. Together, they represented two sides of the same role, the transmission of wisdom across boundaries. The merging of Hermes and Thoth into Hermes Trismegistus was natural. Hermes already carried words. Thoth ensured they were preserved. Hermes guided souls. Thoth recorded their fate. Hermes moved between worlds. Thoth measured them. By combining these roles, the Greeks created a figure who was not only a messenger, but a philosopher, a sage, a god of wisdom. Thus, the role of the messenger god was more than delivering words. It was about carrying truth, guiding souls, and ensuring that wisdom traveled safely across boundaries. Hermes and Thoth, in their union, became the eternal messengers of knowledge, whispering truths across civilizations, ensuring that wisdom was never lost but always carried forward. In the ancient imagination, wisdom was not only about numbers, writing, or laws. It was also about the journey of the soul. Both Thoth and Hermes carried this responsibility, though in different ways, and together they formed a bridge between the living and the eternal. Thoth, in Egyptian belief, stood in the hall of judgment. When a soul entered the afterlife, its heart was weighed against the feather of Mat. Thoth did not decide the outcome that was Osiris's role, but he recorded it faithfully. He was the impartial scribe, ensuring that truth was preserved and that no soul's fate was forgotten. His guidance was quiet but essential. He gave order to the passage from life to eternity. Hermes, in Greek tradition, guided souls along another path. He was the psychopomp, the escort of spirits to the underworld. With his winged sandals, he moved swiftly between realms, ensuring that mortals did not wander lost in death. He was not a judge nor a recorder, but a guide, gentle, clever, and reassuring. His role was to lead, to accompany, to make the transition less fearful. Together, these roles reveal a shared vision. Wisdom is not only about knowledge, but about guidance. Thoth guided minds with writing, numbers, and truth. Hermes guided souls with speech, movement, and companionship. Both gods reminded humanity that wisdom must serve not only the living but also the dead, not only the mind but also the spirit. When the Greeks merged Thoth and Hermes into Hermes Trismegistus, they created a figure who embodied both forms of guidance. He was the philosopher who taught eternal truths, the sage who carried wisdom across boundaries, the god who ensured that both souls and minds found their way. His teachings spoke of unity, balance, and the eternal journey, echoing the roles of both Egyptian and Greek traditions. Thus, the guidance of souls and minds became one of the most enduring legacies of these gods. It was not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, steady, and eternal. Wisdom was not only about knowing, it was about leading, recording, and ensuring that every journey, whether of thought or of spirit, reached its rightful destination. Civilizations often rename what they inherit. When the Greeks encountered Egyptian wisdom, they did not keep the name Thoth. They gave it to Hermes. Yet the essence of the knowledge remained unchanged. Names are cultural garments, but wisdom is the body beneath them. Thoth in Egypt was the scribe of the gods, the inventor of writing, the measurer of the heavens, the recorder of truth. Hermes in Greece was the messenger, the guide of souls, the clever god of communication. When the two were fused into Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, the Greeks were not erasing Thoth. They were translating him, giving him a new name that fit their own language and imagination. The teachings themselves did not change. Writing remained sacred, numbers remained divine, cosmic order remained eternal. The Hermetic texts carried Egyptian principles disguised in Greek words. As above, so below, echoed the Egyptian belief in balance. The pursuit of virtue reflected the feather of Mat. Geometry and harmony reflected the sacred proportions of temples and pyramids. Names changed because cultures need familiarity. The Greeks could not worship Thoth as Egyptians did. They needed Hermes, a god they already knew. By merging the two, they made Egyptian wisdom accessible to their own people. But the knowledge itself, the truths about writing, numbers, morality, and cosmic order, remained untouched. This is the nature of wisdom. It survives translation. It may wear different names, appear in different texts, or be spoken in different languages, but its essence endures. Thoth became Hermes, Egypt became Greece, hieroglyphs became dialogues, but the eternal truths remained the same. And so, the names changed, but the knowledge didn't. The wisdom of Thoth lived on in Hermes Trismegistus, carried across cultures, preserved in disguise, waiting for seekers to uncover its hidden connection. Symbols are the silent language of history. They travel farther than armies, endure longer than kings, and whisper truths across cultures. In Egypt, symbols were sacred, carved into stone and painted on temple walls. The feather of Mat represented truth and balance. The ibis embodied wisdom. The scales reflected justice, and the ankh symbolized life eternal. Each image carried layers of meaning, each mark a fragment of divine order. When the Greeks encountered these symbols, they did not dismiss them. Instead, they absorbed them, reshaping them into their own traditions. The scales of justice became a familiar emblem in Greek courts, echoing the Egyptian vision of balance. The caduceus of Hermes, entwined with serpents, carried echoes of Egyptian symbols of healing and duality. Even the Greek fascination with geometry and proportion reflected Egyptian sacred design, where every temple and pyramid was aligned with cosmic order. Symbols shared across civilizations were not accidents. They were bridges, carrying wisdom silently from one culture to another. Egypt gave Greece the feather of truth, the scales of justice, the sacred geometry of harmony. Greece transformed these into philosophy, law, and art. Later, Rome inherited them, embedding Egyptian and Greek symbols into its empire. And centuries after, these same symbols still appear in modern life, in courthouses, in medicine, in architecture, in art. The merging of Thoth and Hermes was itself a symbolic act. Thoth's ibis became Hermes' staff. Thoth's scales became Hermes' guidance. Thoth's writing became Hermes' speech. Together, they embodied the eternal truth that wisdom survives through symbols, even when names and languages change. Symbols are powerful because they do not need translation. A feather, a scale, a serpent, a circle. These speak across cultures, across centuries, across civilizations. They remind us that wisdom is not confined to one land, but shared, disguised, preserved. The hidden connection between Thoth and Hermes was carried not only in texts but in symbols, silent yet eternal. The merging of Thoth and Hermes into Hermes Trismegistus was not announced with fanfare. It was not carved boldly into temple walls or shouted in marketplaces. Instead, it was concealed, whispered, and disguised. The connection between these two gods was hidden because sacred knowledge was never meant for everyone. In Egypt, wisdom was guarded carefully, reserved for initiates who had undergone purification and discipline. To reveal too much was to risk chaos, for knowledge carried power, and power in the wrong hands could disrupt the delicate balance of Mat. The Greeks, when they absorbed Egyptian wisdom, understood this caution. They clothed the teachings in philosophy, disguising cosmic truths in dialogues and allegories. Plato spoke of eternal forms, Aristotle of universal laws, Stoics of cosmic order, but beneath these words lay Egyptian principles. The disguise was deliberate. To speak openly of Egyptian gods might confuse or alienate Greek audiences, but to embed their wisdom in philosophy ensured survival. The secrecy also protected the knowledge from misuse. Writing was divine, numbers sacred, morality eternal. To hand these truths to anyone without preparation was dangerous. So the teachings were hidden in symbols, rituals, and texts that only the dedicated could understand. The Hermetic writings, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, were filled with allegory, designed to conceal as much as they revealed. Why was this connection hidden? Because wisdom is fragile. It must be preserved carefully, passed only to those who seek it with sincerity. Egypt understood this, Greece respected it, and together they ensured that the legacy of Thoth and Hermes survived not through open proclamation, but through hidden transmission. And so the connection remained in shadows, waiting for seekers to uncover it. It was not lost, not erased, but disguised, a secret bridge between civilizations, a whisper of eternal wisdom carried across time. Knowledge in the ancient world was never neutral. It carried power, and with power came fear. The Egyptians understood this deeply. Their wisdom was sacred, guarded within temples, passed only to initiates who had proven themselves worthy. To reveal too much was dangerous, for knowledge could be misused, twisted, or corrupted. The priests feared that if cosmic truths fell into careless hands, the delicate balance of math, truth, justice, and harmony could collapse. When the Greeks arrived in Egypt, they were eager students. They sought astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and the mysteries of the soul. Yet the Egyptians did not open their libraries freely. They revealed fragments, concealed others, and disguised much of their wisdom in symbols and rituals. This secrecy was not arrogance, but caution. To hand over sacred knowledge without preparation was to risk chaos. The Greeks themselves recognized this fear. They understood that wisdom must be hidden, clothed in allegory, and preserved in philosophy. Plato spoke in dialogues, Aristotle in categories, Stoics in paradoxes, all methods of concealing truth within layers of thought. The Hermetic texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, were written in riddles and allegories, designed to protect wisdom from misuse. The fear of shared ancient knowledge was not unfounded. Writing was divine, numbers sacred, morality eternal. To misuse them was to disrupt cosmic order. Egypt feared that outsiders might take fragments of truth and twist them into power, forgetting the balance that wisdom demanded. Greece respected this fear, embedding Egyptian principles into philosophy, but disguising them in their own language. Thus, the connection between Thoth and Hermes was hidden not only by secrecy, but by fear. Fear that wisdom, if revealed too openly, would be corrupted. Fear that eternal truths, if handed to the unprepared, would become tools of destruction rather than enlightenment. And so, the knowledge was shared carefully, disguised in symbols, preserved in texts, waiting for seekers who approached with reverence. The fear of shared ancient knowledge reminds us that wisdom is not only about knowing, but about responsibility. To carry truth is to carry balance, and to misuse it is to invite chaos. Egypt understood this, Greece respected it, and together they ensured that the legacy of Thoth and Hermes survived, hidden, protected, and eternal. The encounter between Egypt and Greece was more than cultural exchange. It was the birth of philosophy as we know it. Egyptian wisdom, preserved in temples and rituals, carried truths about cosmic order, morality, and the eternal nature of the soul. When Greek thinkers absorbed these teachings, they reshaped them into systems of thought that would define Western civilization. Egypt taught that the universe was governed by math, truth, balance, and justice. The Greeks transformed this into philosophical principles. Plato spoke of harmony within the soul, Aristotle of virtue as moderation, and the Stoics of living in accordance with nature. These ideas were not inventions in isolation. They were echoes of Egyptian morality, translated into Greek language. Egypt revered numbers and geometry as sacred reflections of cosmic design. The Greeks, inspired by this vision, developed mathematics and logic as foundations of philosophy. Pythagoras spoke of the music of the spheres, Plato of eternal forms, and Euclid of geometric truths. Each was carrying forward Egyptian sacred geometry, clothed in Greek rationality. Egypt saw writing as divine, a gift from Thoth to preserve truth. The Greeks adopted this reverence, building libraries, recording dialogues, and ensuring that philosophy was preserved in texts. Hermes, as messenger, became the symbol of this transmission, guiding wisdom from Egypt into Greece. When merged with Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus embodied the philosopher sage, the keeper of eternal truths. Thus, Egyptian wisdom shaped philosophy by providing its foundations: morality, mathematics, cosmic order, and sacred language. Greece did not copy Egypt, but transformed its teachings into new forms, ensuring survival across centuries. The Hermetic texts, born from this fusion, carried principles that influenced not only philosophers but also alchemists, mystics, and scientists throughout history. Philosophy, therefore, was not born in isolation. It was the child of Egypt's ancient wisdom, nurtured in Greek thought and carried forward by Hermes Trismegistus. The truths of Thoth lived on, disguised in dialogues and treatises, shaping the way humanity thinks about justice, knowledge, and the cosmos. Though the temples of Egypt have fallen silent, and the philosophers of Greece have long passed, fragments of their wisdom still survive in our world. The connection between Thoth and Hermes, once hidden, continues to echo through symbols, texts, and traditions that shape our lives even now. Sacred symbols, the scales of justice, the caduceus of Hermes, the Ankh of Egypt, all remain visible today. Courthouses display the scales, medicine carries Hermes's staff, and the Ankh still symbolizes eternal life. These are not relics, but living emblems of ancient truths. Philosophy and morality, ideas of balance, virtue, and harmony, born in Egypt and reshaped in Greece, still guide modern ethics. Concepts like fairness, moderation, and cosmic order are embedded in law, philosophy, and even daily life. Mathematics and geometry, the sacred proportions of pyramids inspired Greek geometry, which in turn became the foundation of modern science. Every equation, every architectural design, every scientific principle carries echoes of Thoth's measurements and Hermes' teachings. Hermetic texts, though fragmented, the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus survive. They influenced medieval alchemists, Renaissance thinkers, and even modern spiritual traditions. The phrase, "as above, so below," continues to inspire seekers of wisdom. The messenger's role in our age of communication, Hermes' legacy, is everywhere. Every message sent across boundaries, every transmission of knowledge, every bridge between cultures reflects the eternal role of the messenger god. What survives today is not only fragments of text or symbols carved in stone. It is the spirit of wisdom itself, the belief that truth is eternal, that knowledge must be preserved, and that balance governs both the cosmos and human life. Thoth and Hermes, though clothed in different names, still whisper through the structures of our civilization. Their legacy reminds us that wisdom is never lost. It may be hidden, disguised, or transformed, but it survives, waiting for those who seek it with reverence. The story of Thoth and Hermes is not one of battles or conquests, but of whispers and echoes. Their legacy was never meant to roar like thunder. It was meant to linger quietly, shaping civilizations in silence. Egypt gave the world its sacred wisdom, writing, numbers, cosmic balance, and Greece carried it forward, reshaping it into philosophy and science. Together, they ensured that truth would survive, even if hidden beneath new names and languages. Thoth, the eternal scribe, recorded the laws of the cosmos. Hermes, the swift messenger, carried those truths across boundaries. When they merged into Hermes Trismegistus, they became more than gods. They became symbols of wisdom itself. Their teachings flowed into Hermetic texts, into philosophy, into alchemy, into the very foundations of how humanity understands order and meaning. Even today, their silent legacy endures. In the scales of justice, in the symbols of medicine, in the geometry of architecture, in the words of philosophy, we still hear their voices. They remind us that wisdom is eternal, that truth survives translation, and that knowledge, though hidden, always finds its way to seekers. Their legacy is not loud, not obvious, but quiet and enduring, like a whisper carried by the wind, like a star shining softly in the night sky. It is the silent thread that binds civilizations together, reminding us that wisdom is never lost, only waiting to be rediscovered. And now, as the story rests, let the legacy of Thoth and Hermes drift into dreams. Their whispers have carried across centuries, and tonight they carry us gently into sleep. May their wisdom guard your thoughts. May their balance guide your rest. Close your eyes, let the silence speak, and surrender to the night. Good night.